war. And if we make that clear and credible, I think that would be a pretty effective deterrent. So I think I've exhausted my 7 minutes. I'll leave my opening remarks there, but very much look forward to the discussion.
Oh, Matt, thanks for that. That was a very helpful overview and very comprehensive. So I'm looking forward to when we get to the Q&A. I'll have some additional things I'd like to tease out a little bit more. But I think it's a great way to start us off. So thank you very much for that. So now we'll go to Stacy Pettyjohn. Stacy is Senior Fellow and Director of the Defense Program at the Center for New American Security. And her areas of expertise include defense strategy, posture, force planning, the defense budget, and wargaming. Stacy spent over 10 years at the RAND Corporation, including time as the Director of the Strategy and Doctrine Program for Project Air Force, and as the Co-Director of the Center for Gaming. She's authored or co-authored reports and articles on a wide range of issues highly relevant to today's discussion, including work on integrated deterrence with allies and insights on wargaming for a potential Taiwan conflict, and then, of course, the issues of nuclear multipolarity, just to name a few of the highly relevant things that she's been working on. So with that, over to you, Stacy. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Marcus. It's great to be here. So you've all laid out some interesting points to start out with. I'm going to narrow down a little bit and focus probably most on the military side, because I think that is the most important component of integrated deterrence for Taiwan, which ASD Eli Ratner has called the pacing scenario for the department. And in my view, the Pentagon really needs to focus on the things that it does best and it does uniquely, and that really is warfighting and conventional deterrence and nuclear deterrence. So while I like the concept of integrated deterrence, and I think there is a lot of value to it, when it is being put forward by the Pentagon instead of the National Security Council or the White House, I think that sort of limits the applicability of some of the other levers of power which aren't under the auspices of DoD. I'm also a little skeptical. I think it is really important to figure out what type of sanctions could be used against China, how we ensure that our supply chains are resilient and secure, because we've seen how disruptions can cause problems. But economic sanctions take a long time typically to have effect, as we can see with Russia. And even when they are really powerful, that means that they can be a component of a larger strategy of deterrence, but I don't think they're going to be the main factor that actually stops a country from taking action once it's decided to. So across domains, I think absolutely makes sense. It's clear that all of the domains today are interlinked, and in particular, the U.S. Department of Defense is planning on trying to leverage this cross-domain sort of synergy as a core aspect of its warfighting concepts. So being prepared for attacks in space and cyber, as well as the air, sea, and land is important. The allies and partners piece, I do obviously agree with and think is hugely important, though for slightly different reasons than what Matt was highlighting. The signal of credibility and showing that we're not going to be standing alone with Taiwan. It won't just be the U.S. and Taiwan, that Japan, Australia, maybe the Philippines, all kinds of other countries are going to resist any Chinese aggression is important. But I wanted to go beyond that. And what Becca Wasser and I argue in our report is that the U.S. really needs to start having more specific discussions about these scenarios and about who would be doing what. You know, maybe some countries aren't going to contribute to the fight. Maybe some countries might be securing other theaters like the Brits. But we need to begin to tease out what our different roles and responsibilities might be, where we might stand, because nobody's going to make commitments ahead of time, but to really figure out how we can integrate our military capabilities and operate together, because as many countries as are willing to get involved will be needed and will be a dramatic add to the capability. There's always the access piece, which is important. And I do think that we've seen significant improvements and really notable announcements in the last several months, starting with the Japan 2+2, which contained a bunch of improvements not only to the Marine Littoral Regiment, but also with respect to the broader posture and access to other locations in Japan, which improves resiliency. The expansion of new ADECA sites, which I think are still being determined exactly where they are, could be significant as long as the department actually follows through and makes investments and pre-positions equipment and makes it so these locations actually can support U.S. forces. Australia, we're seeing improvements, also great to the northern air bases so that they can support U.S. bomber and tanker operations. So that's all really critical, but I do think we need to go farther and begin with our closest allies. And for the case of Taiwan, I would say it's the US, Japan, and Australia to talk about planning in this situation, which we've heard reports is beginning to happen, and what we'd be willing to do and what we wouldn't be willing to do. The Japanese still have a lot of restrictions on what they can do given their constitution, but they are leaning forward and seem to realize that their security is intimately tied up to with that of Taiwan, and that they are invested in maintaining the status quo. The integrated deterrence strategy goes through different logics. I find that there's certainly truth, and it's important that resilience is a key component of deterrence, being able to survive and continue to fight. But I sort of find that the discussion of cost imposition and denial confuses things, and that we need to be more specific with respect to Taiwan. Are we planning to deny? And I think that is the strongest strategy. That is the one where it is sort of the gold standard of deterrence, because you develop the capabilities to win, like Matt was saying, sink the invasion fleet. And that really needs to happen. I do want to end by going to the topic of vertical escalation, and I'm not sure about what role, using American nuclear weapons for warfighting to stop the invasion, if that makes sense. But I do think we have sort of tended to silo off conventional deterrence from nuclear deterrence with respect to China. And that is not something that we can do anymore. Hannah Dennis and I just released a report last week, Avoiding the Brink, where we were exploring the implications of China's expanding nuclear arsenal. And I think it is changing the situation in ways that aren't fully understood, and that really merit further exploration, but raise the costs or the risks of vertical escalation in a way that didn't exist previously, and that we need to be really mindful of what those are and think about take Chinese nuclear threats seriously, because there is a real possibility, given their expanding capabilities, that they could choose to use them. And in a situation over Taiwan, which is obviously one of the priorities for China and so critical to the CCP, they might be willing to do so. So on that happy note, I'll end it there, and I look forward to the conversation that follows.
Stacy, thank you so much. And yeah, that certainly was ending on a pretty sobering note, of course. So this point that you raised about deterrence by denial being the gold standard, vice deterrence by punishment, I think it's an interesting one, and it's very well-suited lead-in to where we'll go with our next panelist. So unfortunately, my team informs you that Dr. Wu is still having some technical difficulties. And kind of an example here of alliance interoperability or partner interoperability being a challenge you often see. And so we're going to get to Dr. Wu when he is able to join, and we'll go now to our final panelist then. In the meantime, Dr. Melanie Sisson. She's a fellow at the Strobe Talbot Center for Security Strategy and Technology at the Brookings Institution. She was previously Vice President of Analysis at a national security artificial intelligence and machine learning technology company, and a senior fellow and director of the Stimson Center's Defense Strategy and Planning Program. She's a consultant to the Department of Defense, lectures regularly with universities nationwide, and has published in national media outlets and academic journals. I just recently became familiar with Melanie's work, and in particular, a piece advocating for deterrence by punishment rather than the deterrence by denial as the appropriate strategy for deterring PRC aggression against Taiwan. So, without any further introduction here, then let's go to Melanie and hear her thoughts. So, thanks for joining us, Melanie.
Great. Thank you, Marcus. Thanks for having me, and to the Scowcroft Center, especially to be in such excellent company as is occupying this panel today. There's already a lot to discuss, so I am looking forward to that portion of the conversation. I'm going to start my comments by offering a few thoughts on integrated deterrence as a concept before considering its application to the Taiwan question specifically. And as has been mentioned and alluded to, and in some cases made more specific, there are objections to integrated deterrence. And I think two primary objections are really common. The first is that non-military tools of influence are insufficient, and that other tools of influence aren't the purview of or relevant to the activities of the Department of Defense. I will say up front that I also have objections to integrated deterrence, but my primary objection is actually that I think the word integrated is just redundant. Integrated deterrence is not a new concept. Neither are multi-domain deterrence or tailored deterrence or any other descriptors of deterrence. The impulse to add adjectives and qualifiers is a good thing, insofar as it indicates a renewed interest in the strategic community in thinking about deterrence. But it's also a sobering reminder of just how much our understanding of coercion in international politics atrophied during the post-Cold War period. And I think that atrophy is really evident in the discomfort that the national security community has in acknowledging that deterrence is a form of coercion, in the fact that there's debate about the idea of integrated deterrence, and in what I think is the unfortunate reality that the word deterrence really has become just shorthand for everything of what the U.S. military today is and does. It's shorthand for the extent of U.S. military power. An intelligent alien reading our contemporary discourse about deterrence really could be forgiven for arriving at the conclusion that deterrence is a capability, some accumulation of weapons and systems that you can simply buy more of. But it isn't. Deterrence isn't a capability, it's a strategy. And more specifically, it's a strategy of coercion, one that seeks to achieve a specific policy outcome by convincing another actor to behave in a particular way. So a good strategy of deterrence tries to do this by doing what all good strategy does. It assesses which combination of available means, whether it's military power, economic leverage, diplomatic finesse, and so on, will be most effective in convincing that targeted actor not to do what we don't want it to do. And then the strategy rationalizes those means into an achievable plan. So to say it another way, I think all good strategies of deterrence are in fact integrated deterrence. We know that just having military superiority is not an effective strategy of deterrence. It's insufficient to prevent war from happening, and we know that because wars have happened even where one side faces certain military suicide, and we have modern examples in Japan in 1941, Egypt in the Ramadan War, China in the Korean War, and more. And my view is that history has to inform our thinking about deterring a PRC use of force against Taiwan. There is a lot of energy around the Taiwan question at the moment, and I think that's primarily because advances in the capabilities of the PLA have made the United States nervous, and therefore precipitated debate about the role of the United States in cross-strait relations. So just by way of just making sure all of the first principles are on the table, we just start by remembering that since 1979, the United States has adopted a constellation of official positions that we call the One China policy. And the One China policy allows us to acknowledge, but not to accept, China's perspective that there's one China, Taiwan is part of China. Under the One China policy, the United States has developed really robust unofficial relations with the government and people of Taiwan, and that's consistent with our interest in preserving peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. U.S. policy is guided by that interest in ensuring cross-strait disputes are resolved peacefully and in a manner that reflects the will of Taiwan's people. And over time, this has required the United States to deter Taiwan from declaring independence and also to deter the CCP from attempting unification by force. The 40-year success of this strategy of dual deterrence rests on the unwillingness of the United States to provide either an unconditional commitment to Taipei that it will come to its defense militarily, or an unconditional commitment to Beijing that it will not. The so-called policy of strategic ambiguity, which I hope we can discuss further in the session. The U.S. national security interest in the status of Taiwan remains that the CCP and the people of Taiwan resolve the island's political status peacefully. Dual deterrence, I think, for this reason, therefore, remains the U.S. strategy. It's reinforced by U.S. declaratory policy, which is to oppose unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. There's no question that the modernization of the PLA has changed the regional military balance, and significantly enough that the United States no longer can be confident that it would decisively defeat every type of PLA use of force in the Taiwan Strait. This fact, I just don't think this fact necessitates that the U.S. abandons its strategy of dual deterrence. And I don't think it means that the United States should seek to reconstitute our prior degree of dominance. Posturing the U.S. military to convince the CCP that the PLA couldn't succeed in any and every contingency over Taiwan is infeasible in the near term, and I think very likely beyond that. The PLA's advances are considerable and they're ongoing. Geography works in its favor. And history, again, demonstrates that it's far easier to arrive at an overconfident assessment of relative capability than it is to arrive at an accurate one. So attempting to demonstrate superiority for all contingencies would require a commitment of forces that would inhibit the United States from behaving like the global power that it is, with global interests to which the military must also attend. And I don't think this posture is necessary for dual deterrence to extend what's already a 40-year record of success. In short, I think deterrence in the Taiwan Strait actually remains in fairly good shape. So what we can do is encourage the government of Taiwan to adopt a defense concept that forces the PLA into suboptimal strategies and that increases the battle damage that Beijing would have to anticipate and accept. The CCP should also be reminded that in addition to retaining the option of direct U.S. military engagement, U.S. military superiority in the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean allow us to threaten the maritime shipping that China depends on for access to energy and global markets and supply chains. The inevitable damage that a use of force would cause to the global economy, which was mentioned earlier, and the imposition of sanctions and restricted access to critical inputs that are needed to sustain China's economic development and the quality of life of its people, I think would most certainly compound China's losses. At the same time, the CCP should have no illusion that it can inflict a first strike on the United States that prevents us from joining in the defense of Taiwan if policymakers choose to do so. Militarily, that will require the armed services to develop concepts of operation that maximize the effects of dispersal and mobility and localized decision-making, and to make investments in portable and expendable assets like uncrewed systems that launch sensors and anti-ship missiles without runways, because runways are so difficult to defend. The department also has to prioritize improving the resilience of its command, control, and communication systems against disabling electronic and cyber attacks. And actually, I'd like to see a lot more energy in that area in particular. So I'll conclude by saying that I think those are the measures, not an expensive and what I think is probably a provocative attempt to regain regional military dominance should be the basis of a strategy to deter the PRC from using force against Taiwan. I will stop there. And as I mentioned, I think there's really a lot to discuss with these sharp panelists, and I'm looking forward to that. So thank you, Marcus.
And thank you very much, Melanie. Appreciate it. So this has been great that we've had three very, I think, different views so far. Some overlap between the three, but certainly some distinctive points. And one of the threads I'd like to start by pulling on is this question of ambiguity versus clarity. Melanie, you kind of laid down the gauntlet on this one. So, but I would like to go to Matt because I know you have some thoughts on this, and you mentioned also the challenges with ambiguity in your opening remarks. And so Matt, can you expand a little bit more on your view of why ambiguity is such a problem?
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. And I think it just goes back to basic deterrence theory. You want to clearly communicate what it is you're trying to do, what it is you're trying to deter, what the consequences would be for the adversary. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to influence the adversary's cost-benefit calculation. And so if Xi Jinping, if the Chinese PLA is uncertain whether an attack on Taiwan would bring the United States into the conflict, then I think that makes an attack more likely. You could see Xi essentially miscalculate the way Putin did. Xi might think this is easy, I can do it, it's going to be quick, the United States isn't going to get involved. And so that would lead to a war that we don't want. On the other hand, if the United States makes it very clear that no, it's not going to be easy, this is going to mean a major war between the United States and China, I think it's much more likely that Xi Jinping is deterred. So as I was mentioning before, I think the president saying one thing, his administration kind of walking it back has been confusing. Now, I did talk to some colleagues in the administration who tried to explain it, and they said, well, ambiguity means that maybe we'll get involved, maybe we won't. And so that means that at any given moment, it would be up to the president to decide. And so when the president made those statements, that was his view at the moment, but it doesn't change the underlying policy. So I think that is a way to paint a coherent picture from that, but I still think it's confusing. I think it would be better to just say we're changing the policy. We would defend Taiwan. And again, that doesn't mean ripping up the one China policy. It doesn't mean ripping up the other foundations of the US-China relationship. The strategic ambiguity, strategic clarity piece is one small piece of the broader one China policy. So I think keep everything else constant and make a change there to enhance deterrence.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. And so I'd also like to go to Stacy on this point too. And Stacy, your thoughts on ambiguity, vice clarity in this situation. What's the advantages, disadvantages? What's your take?
I come down, I said with Melanie on this one, that I think the current policy is the right one because there is some path dependence, and it clearly is something that China has said is a red line. If we were to veer from this policy and potentially outright say that we are going to defend Taiwan, extended deterrence is the hardest type of deterrence, and there are always questions about it. Even when we have clear policy, you can go back to the Cold War where, there were always allies in Europe who were questioning whether the United States would trade, New York for Paris or whatever, or for Bonn. And that I think question is always going to be there. The U.S. has made it pretty clear, and if they actually develop the capabilities that they are against unilateral aggression that changes the status quo, and that is important. And if they have that capability and maintain the current policy, which doesn't, cross a red line for China, and also has the dual benefit of continuing to ensure that Taipei is restrained and doesn't declare independence, which would certainly trigger a response from Beijing.
All right, thanks for that. So I think that was a good line of discussion to have some back and forth on ambiguity versus clarity and how it relates to deterrence. My team has just informed me that Dr. U Zuli is actually online now. And so, Doctor, if we can go to you, I would love to hear your opening comments. And I'm so sorry that we had some technical difficulties, but I think it was worth the effort to get you here, even at such a late hour. There, thank you so much for taking the time. Looking forward to your thoughts. And now we have a sound issue. There we go.
Okay, I'm sorry. Just click. Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the technical problem that caused the delay. Originally, I planned a PowerPoint presentation for everyone, but right now I think we don't have a time for that. If I have, I can share that to you. Can I?
No, we have time, and to be fair, Dr. Wu, I do want to emphasize to everyone your background actually before you get started, and for our audience, Dr. Wu is a retired Republic of China Navy captain with experience spanning military operations research, defense strategy, the defense industry, and defense affairs. He's been a manager in the private sector and a Taiwan Naval Academy professor. And I highly recommend his recent article on reconsidering Taiwan's defense strategy vis-a-vis lessons from the Ukraine war. And so, Dr. Wu, go ahead and go forward with your presentation. We're just really happy to have you here.
Okay. Can you see the presentation here?
Yeah, we can see it. Yeah.
Okay, let's start it. I will make it quick. For the first one, I just put all my observation for the past year. I'm tracking the deterrence issue that raised by the DoD. By browse through those information, I found that since 2020, I got a deterrence by detection, which is published by the Australian Naval Review. Following as CSBA also have some papers talking about the concepts. Then later on in March of 2021, during the interim national security strategic guidance, of course, President Biden say America is back and the alliance is back. Then in the same year, started from the April, the DoD uniform and the civilian officials starting to propose the idea about integrated deterrence in many occasions, meetings, conference, as well as the internal speech. So I think that's the time they start to promote this idea and also address that this is the cornerstone of the American national defense. During that time of period, as you can see on the right-hand side, actually in Indo-Pacific as well as in Russia and Ukraine, there's a lot of gray zone activities going on. I think the concept is also affected by these activities. Then later on the 2021 November, we see the Global Posture Review released and also address the threat by Russia's gray zone activity, which is mean to me also put a focus on the deterrence by detection. And then the last year's February, the Russia invaded Ukraine, and NDS also because the reason have been delayed. Then to the March, DoD issued a non-classified NDS fact sheet. They addressed the nuclear deterrence. I found that that's because at the same time, Russia also said they will not rule out the use of nuclear weapons. I think that's the reason. And following the announcement of NSS National Security Strategies as well as National Defense Strategies on October 2022. So at that time, around that time, Ukraine also launched a counteroffensive in September. That's the information that I just make some kind of arrangement for that for your reference. Then the idea I watched, I observed, I get some idea. Put on here this slide, you can see. I saw a practice of the deterrence strategy in the Russia-Ukraine war. At first, before the military action started, or around that time, actually it's acting like a deterrence by detection. And also the integrated deterrence starting cooking. Then when the military action started, then especially the US tried to integrate all those Western countries or allies to have common actions against Russia's attack on the Ukraine. Then because the failed of the deterrence, we can see the punishment, enforcement coming, especially financially, economically, banking, SWIFT, all those things start enforced, then we can see, can that still deter the Russia's invade to Ukraine? So we can see the Western countries start to give the weapon to the Ukraine, actually to build up the Ukraine's denial capability. So I say on the right-hand side is starting denial enforcement. Then we come back to thinking about the deterrence under unbalanced military power, especially like Ukraine to Russia and Taiwan to China. In this kind of situation, we will have to think about one thing is not like the competition between the big powers. Small countries in face of a superior power should adopt a different strategy thinking. The purpose of deterrence is to influence the hostile decision process. And the goal is to dispel or change its course of action that is not in the defender's interest. Of course, military capability is the key element, but not the only one. The decision comes from a comprehensive measurement. Russia's invasion declared the effectiveness of the deterrence. While expecting a successful deterrence, one should also anticipate the risks of a failed deterrence. Together with Ukraine, the international community share the cost of deterrence failure. And this slide, actually I got some draw from a study. This table is from a study that modeled denial and punishment strategies by exploring the interplay between defenders and aggressors, finding that minimizing the risk of a war with the deployment of a denial or punishment ability depends on the balance of military capabilities of the defenders and the aggressor. That is, if defender cannot compete with the aggressors in conventional combat, such as North Korea, and terrorist organization, all resources should be used to punishment ability. If the defenders can maintain a partial balance with the aggressors, such as Germany and Japan, they should focus on the ability of denial. Only when defenders have considerable advantages, such as the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, should they have the ability to develop denial and punishment capacities simultaneously. That's the research findings from this study. Another one is from another research study I also put it here. It addressed the Baltic states' deterrence strategy cognition. In a global economy, the above study found that the Baltic states, the table of the study here, shows that given the NATO's defense strategy, it has been found that Estonia tend to be in denial. Lithuania emphasizes denial rather than punishment. And Latvia think that it is punishment. On the other hand, the perception of their own deterrence strategies is that both Estonia and Latvia are inclined to be in denial, and Lithuania shows a clear denial. So we can see how was the implication for Taiwan here. The above study found that the Baltic states realized their own strength cannot punish their hostile neighbor. Instead, it's better to form a deterrent environment with collective strength to have a comparative advantage. So they recognize the need to rely on the collective capability of NATO, with the United States as a key contributor to deter Russia. However, doubts about the effects of deterrence, especially after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014, have increased the need to strengthen their denial capabilities to face imminent threat. The Baltic states' recognition highlights the limited strategic options of small states in an unbalanced power posture. So for the Taiwan, I think being a global economic military power in the face of China and Russia's and China's threat, the United States adopts integrated deterrence as the core concept for defense strategy, not to mention Taiwan, which has limited conventional military power. Where does Taiwan's deterrence for PRC come from? Integrated means could form an effective deterrence, and the military power is one of the keys. Like the Baltic states, Taiwan needs to pursue integrated means, including diplomacy, economy, military, technology, and the will of fighting to build credible capabilities to effectively deter the PRC. Secretary Blinken said that if something happens to Taiwan, the global economy may be devastated. Russia's invasion of Ukraine had demonstrated that continuous and firm substantive support of international like-minded friends are crucial. So up to now, I just mentioned about the deterrence idea from the lesson from the Ukraine war, as well as the Taiwan's implications. So I would like to give something idea which is come from my own, which I had addressed in a meeting last year. It's called a defense strategy based on the area denial capability for Taiwan. Of course, the idea needs a very firm budget support, and it is focused on the integrated area denial capabilities. The areas should be the national interests, security interests, not everywhere. Since the limited military power we have, the integrated will be in terms of a joint combat capabilities. And the key point is the interoperability for integration. This including in the military itself, as well as between departments, the governmental departments, and the international allies. So I always address the importance of the interoperabilities. And
yeah, that interoperability is really a key point. The
yes,
challenge with the technical issues you had. I'm sorry, Dr. Wu. I just want to make sure that we do have enough time to complete the discussion. So,
okay.
But I think that's a great place to close there on this this issue of the area denial. And I look forward to discussing this more with you as we continue the dialogue. And so it strikes me that in our conversation, Dr. Wu, one thing I wanted you to weigh in on while you have the floor is as you were coming in, we were having a conversation about ambiguity versus clarity. And how that plays into deterrence, and I think you've alluded a few times in your presentation to the ambiguity and also to some of the statements that reinforce deterrence. So, wondered if you had any thoughts on where you come down on the value of strategic ambiguity vice greater clarity vis-a-vis the number one, the U.S. Approach to deterrence, but also just in general, if you have any thoughts on ambiguity versus clarity and its role in deterring PRC aggression.
Yes, I think in fact, from the put my shoes, my feet in the PRC's shoes, they are planning whether it's a clarity or ambiguity. Their hypothesis is the America will come to help. That's their scenarios. So they're always prepared for that. That's for the PRC side. But in Taiwan side, I think the ambiguity and the clarity is kind of created some kind of I will not say it's difficulties, but in fact, in our military planning, in our resource allocations, we need a policy to do that, and that always affected by the USA policy as well. Since the clarity, if the US adopted clarity strategy, then we know how to prepare ourselves based on that. But in that case, I know we risk a very high political risk with the conflict of trying to provoking the China. So that's the risk come with it. But with the
for EU as an entity or EU countries in deterrence and dealing with the threat of aggression from the PRC.
So just say that Stacy said that not just the military, we can do a lot of things. Currently, I think there's some project going on that we are working with those friends in the EU, some of them working on about cyber security things. Since the internet is no bounded, it's kind of international wise. So there's no territorial limits around that. So any kind of security issues on the cyberspace, we can work together no matter where you are. And we can also work on the same time and the same thing. And the other point I would like to address is the self-deterrence. The reason I raised the question is because according to the Ukraine war, I can tell there's a lot of self-deterrence going on because the timing of the help to come to the help the Ukraine. I know there's a lot of assessment before provide a help decision, but since that's on the cost of the Ukrainian people, so I will put the Taiwan's presence like a Ukrainian. When we have that kind of situation, we hope that the help, any kind of assistance, is coming timely. So just in time and without delayed too much. Since the delaying is at the cost of the Taiwanese people, and we can find Taiwan is an island, and we don't have much territorial space to move. Not like Ukraine, you can move from the east to the west. So it's kind of crucial to us. That's the point I want to address. Thanks.
Yeah, the timing is really an important issue with the different geography of the Taiwan Strait versus the strategic depth and operational depth in Europe. Yeah, the timing of support is really key, and it sounds to me like the support really has to be from the points that have already been made. The support from Europe to be effective would really have to be signaled pretty early. And ideally in the deterrence phase before a conflict starts to be most effective. And so this is a really helpful line of conversation. So a lot of different directions we could take the conversation at this point, but I did want to cover one other question from a questioner who asked to remain anonymous, and that is the potential for simultaneous conflicts with the PRC and North Korea at the same time, how that potentially affects deterrence of aggression against Taiwan. So maybe in a scenario where there's already a conflict in the Korean Peninsula, does that potentially undermine a deterrence of aggression against Taiwan during while it's going on or in the immediate aftermath? And then conversely, does the potential for North Korea to do opportunistic or reactive aggression on the Korean Peninsula or in the region, does that actually pose an additional challenge for deterrence that maybe we haven't, for deterrence of aggression against Taiwan, that maybe hasn't been fully considered? This is something also I'm personally interested in, so I'd love to hear some thoughts from the panel. And again, I'll go to a volunteer, and if not, I'll certainly choose one of you, because I think all of you probably have some perspectives on this this important but under-examined question. So any volunteers for this one? All right. So actually, Stacy's going to volunteer again. Okay, go ahead, Stacy.
I will take this one as well. No, I think it is something that we need to be considering. I'm always leery of assuming that any other country, even if they are aligned with another one, is subordinate to it and will just be the cat's paw and do, that Pyongyang will do what Beijing demands or asks of it. But Pyongyang does have a history of acting opportunistically and trying to take advantage of moments when the United States has otherwise been distracted. There were concerns during the Korean War in the 50s that something could happen across the Taiwan Strait. The geography is obviously intertwined and create problems. But I think this is where our allies and partners, again, play an important role. The United States has been moving to have South Korea taking the lead on defending the Korean Peninsula. The challenge, I think, really, and what concerns me and keeps me up at night is that I don't see North Korean aggression taking the form of an invasion of the South, that they would do something provocative in a limited way, and then it could spiral and escalate, especially given Seoul's policy of massive punishment and retaliation, or whatever. I think they might have changed the name. And so having to manage those escalation dynamics and the dynamics of what's going on with Beijing and over Taiwan at the same time, when signals to one could easily be misinterpreted by the other, and thinking about how you control both situations and don't let aggression actually succeed is a really thorny issue, and something that definitely merits more consideration.
Stacy, thanks for that. And we're going to go to Stacy now. Oh wait, Matt wants to go first, so we'll go to Matt and then Stacy, and then Suli, if you would also like to address this one as we have time available, like to hear your thoughts as well, because this one, I think there's a lot of fodder here for conversation. So we'll go to Matt and then to Melanie. Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. I think this is a good question. When you mentioned simultaneity, Marcus, my mind immediately went to China, Russia at the same time. And I think that is a problem as well. And many in Washington are beginning to think about this. But the China-North Korea conflicts at the same time is probably more likely, in my view, but is not getting the same attention. So I think it's great that the questioner raised this. And I think it's more likely for some of the reasons that Stacy said, but also the United States has a large military presence in South Korea. If there's a major war between the United States and China over the Taiwan Strait, would China really just let those tens of thousands of U.S. forces sit still in South Korea? Maybe even if those forces are operating or supporting the war in the Taiwan Strait, I find that possible, but unlikely. I think it's China might decide to attack those forces in Korea, and then that could bring Korea directly into the conflict as well. So I don't know the solution, but I do think that more thinking about simultaneity, Korea, China, does make a lot of sense.
Thanks very much, and also this whole angle of the Russia piece of simultaneity, and actually you, I believe in your op-ed, was it yesterday, right? You were talking about having to deal with potentially 4 nuclear armed states simultaneously, with Iran entering the mix. So yeah, so thinking about simultaneity even just beyond those 2 adversaries, I think is also another thing we can incorporate in a future discussion. So let's go now to Melanie and your thoughts, and then we'll go to you, Suli.
Thanks, Marcus. So I largely agree with Stacy. I think the real concern is about miscalculation and miscommunication, and not that the CCP would take contingency on the Korean Peninsula as an opportunity for a full-scale invasion or use of force otherwise against Taiwan. I think that that's for two reasons. The first is that the CCP doesn't want to see conflict on the Korean Peninsula. I think they would be inclined to do what they could to contribute to de-escalating that kind of event. And then secondarily, the PLA is opportunistic, but not in terms of launching large-scale kinds of operations. The opportunism is much smaller scale, bite-sized sorts of things. They're very much more cautious about any kinds of large operations. And so, the concern here should be, again, to reinforce Stacy's point of finding, thinking proactively about how those scenarios would arise and putting in place measures that would help us to manage them as safely as possible if they did.
All right, thanks. I think this is something definitely worth some further discussion. It sounds like in these conversations, some different perspectives. All right, and so I think we'll go to Zhu Li next, and I'd like to ask, in particular, your thoughts. Say if a conflict does begin on the Korean Peninsula, does this have major implications for what are the implications for deterrence of aggression against Taiwan? What do you think, Doctor?
Yes, actually, I have kind of different thought from Melanie's view. If these two conflicts happens simultaneously, everybody didn't mention about Japan. From Taiwan's point of view, Japan during the conflict or the crisis between the Taiwan Strait, as well as North Korea, Northeast Asia, Japan always plays very key roles there. While if the North Korea attack, their primary target, my point of view, is not South Korea. Since their capability, their traditional combat capability is not so good, but the long-range nuclear missiles is under developing, is getting there. And their target, I think, primarily will be Japan. Maybe longer distance to the territory of the U.S. And Japan will put into a very difficult situation if these two sides happens. And Japan played a very supporting role to the U.S. military. So while this happened, Japan will be the one who put into a very difficult situation. And that might be the chance for the POA or the CCP to apply. They tried to encourage North Korea to launch an attack on Japan. Then the Japanese will divert their effort to manage those crises between North Korea and Japan. Then the PLA will start their invasion to Taiwan. Then how the U.S. can handle this? This crisis situation is likely. It's not likely. It's not unlikely. So I think we also need to think about this. No matter, so it's kind of impossible, but my point of view is likely, is possible. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great perspective, and the Japan angle is one I think that gets even less consideration when this comes up, and of course, the United Nations command rear bases in Japan are critical for any preparations for a warfight or execution of a contingency operation on the Korean Peninsula, and so North Korea, of course, is well aware of that, and so yeah, this whole potential for Japan to be targeted, whether it's just Japan specifically or as part of a larger spread of the conflict. The conflict with North Korea probably would not be confined to the Korean Peninsula as it escalated. So I think that's a great point. And so we of course late in the conversation we got a lot more questions, and so we won't have time to address them all. But I appreciate the enthusiasm from our viewers. I think we have time maybe to address just one more briefly, and probably not for all the panelists, but if I can have a volunteer to address this one. This is from Jonathan Corrado, the policy director for the Korea Society, and he asks, as we look to build a coalition to respond to a Taiwan contingency to strengthen the deterrence, what's the best way to deal with what he would call fence sitters in the region on this issue, ones that aren't necessarily committing up front to deterring or supporting militarily in particular in this sort of contingency? Does anyone want to address that one? What's the best way to deal with countries in that space? So I see Melanie's volunteered, so go ahead, Melanie.
Yeah, I fear this is going to be a little bit of an unsatisfactory answer, but the first thing we can do is actually listen to their reasons for that. Their leaders operate and work for the enlightened self-interest of their own countries. If they are fence sitters, it's for good reason, either because the distribution of their interests are such that they think participating militarily is more dangerous than it is helpful. We also should take care, as we are working to integrate our foreign policy goals with our economic policy, and understand that when we do that, we place a number of our allies in East Asia and beyond in some uncomfortable binds that force them into choices that they might not prefer to make at this point. So I think this shouldn't be a place where we think about twisting arms and reading people the Riot Act. It really should be going the other way around, which is to consider their interests, consider the position that they're in, and figure out how we can work collectively to strengthen deterrence generally without forcing allies and partners to take positions that their populations aren't ready to take just yet.
All right, no, that's a really interesting point, though, listening first. And I think this actually takes us almost full circle, because we talked at the beginning about the role of allies and partners in integrated deterrence. And so I think we're about out of time there. But I think this has been a spectacular, fascinating discussion. I personally learned a lot, and I think this really showed the value of the format of an event where you can get a good discussion going among participants with diverse views, and then include, of course, the interested partners and allies as appropriate. And so I'm really looking forward actually to building on that last point of discussion from Melanie about getting a better sense from allies and partners in the region about their concerns and how we can move them to play a more direct and role in deterring the potential aggression of the PRC against Taiwan. And so I'd like to say thank you now to the TECRA team for making this event possible, to our panelists for participating in this really great discussion. Thanks to those of you who asked questions, even to those of you whose questions we weren't able to get to. And then also I'd like to give a special thanks to the Atlantic Council staff who conducted the preparations for this complex event and ensured the word got out and enabled a successful seminar. The events team, the comms team, and then of course particularly the dedicated EPSI staff of Lauren Gilbert, Kyoko Amai, and Emma Verges. And so you can expect more of this type of programming from the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, where we're looking at the issues of allies, strategy, and defense in the Indo-Pacific region. And I look forward to our next event in the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative and China Hub Cross-Strait Seminar Series, which has been an excellent partnership between the Atlantic Council and TECRA in Washington, D.C. So until next time, and keep talking about and discussing these issues, and we look forward to the next Cross-Strait Seminar. Thank you so much.